All right, so breaking news we have. I'm going to say you're going to be the future Congresswoman. I'm the one who, look, I'm a man enough to say I can call you a bum and kind of a Karen on Twitter, and you had the courage and the strength to show up here. And so I just want to let you know that I commend you for your. I said you were a coward, and I'm going to start off by apologizing to you, and say you're not. All right, and I thank you for coming on. Um, and I mean, I had to start off by just commending you for showing up today,
Well,
and
I appreciate that.
let's that is leadership right there. So, all right, I'm done, John. I'm going home. All right, I'll see you later. You take it from here. That's all I was allowed to say contractually. John's got to do the rest because you showed up.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just want to knock the elephant in the room out up front. Like, we had some tense back and forth on Twitter, and glad that you decided on anyway. So, looking forward to talking a little bit more about what you believe, how you got to where you are, because we're interested. So, just to give you a little bit of my wife is going there. So the fact that you've went into politics is something that's super interesting to me, and probably going to ask a couple of questions. Your thoughts on the state of nursing currently, because I've got concerns. I follow some Reddit threads out there that literally just seem to bring out the worst in the nursing profession as a whole, and it's kind of a scam. But let's get started with just kind of the get to know you. For being an RN straight to the political stage definitely isn't what people would consider a traditional pathway into politics. So just want to start off by hearing a little bit about you, a little bit about your career, and what made you decide to make the jump from being an RN and a travel nurse to running for Congress.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on, and I know that I appreciate the getting rid of the elephant in the room because ultimately I'm a Christian first and foremost, and to me, big things that matter to me are confessing wrongdoing and being truthful. And so I actually really appreciate the fact that you're just willing to say that up front, because that makes me feel a whole lot more like, hey, let's have a discussion. So thank you very much, because I was pretty irritated. And I am pretty spunky, and I do try to take any interviews that I possibly can. So I do think there was just a miscommunication there. And yes, I'm a nurse. I've been nursing for about 10 years, and it is a big jump to run for Congress. I mean, I tell people I don't have political experience, but I've been advocating for patients at the bedside for almost 10 years, and it's a lot of similarities. I was just at lunch with a few older nurses that have done it for years and years and years, and we were just talking about how many similarities there are. A lot of times you're dealing with a patient that needs something and the doctor doesn't know that, and you have to really push to get it done. And you have to move pretty quickly, and you have to be able to assess and intervene at a relatively quick pace. And so what actually led me to running is completely extraneous. My husband is a CPA, and he was the lead data expert on the Trump versus Raffensperger case in Georgia. And so we have an interesting angle on election integrity because he was frustrated with the way the Republicans were portraying his data, and then he was frustrated that the Democrats weren't even addressing it. So that court case was pushed off until January 8th of 2021, so it was never heard in court. So most people don't really know the information. It's interesting that movie 2000 Mules just came out. I don't know if you guys have watched it, but it's definitely pretty objective, as well as my husband's report, which I'm happy to share with anyone. But ultimately, what really pushed me to run was just a repetitive lack of truth in the media. And we were just seeing this repetition in related to January 6th, related to election integrity, related to COVID, which was my world, just seeing how much was coming out and how much was not really honest and truthful, and how that was really separating a lot of friends and family and even church members. My husband and I were actually living in Seattle. I've been a travel nurse for most of my career. And so I'm from North Carolina. I've lived in mostly in North Carolina my whole life, but met my husband in Seattle and was living in Seattle at the time of COVID, which was very chaotic. And so just really that repetitive lack of truth combined with disunity related to lack of truth in our country. And then when the mandates came out, that was just the point in which I felt like the federal government was overstepping their responsibilities, and both of my parents are respiratory therapists, and they were both forced to take the vaccine or lose their jobs, and they're the front line of the front line, and that was the point in which the federal government was touching my family, and I couldn't stand for it anymore.
Hey, John, let me just say first and foremost, you married a beautiful man. We were looking at the pictures on Instagram and I'm like, he could be a model. All right. So I haven't seen 2000 Mules yet, but if he's in it, it's going to the top because congratulations. And I'm not into guys, but you recognize good looking when you see good looking. So there you go.
I'll let him know.
He was probably getting the wrestling ring ready for me after what we posted the other day. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I had to apologize, because he could beat me up.
Probably. Well, I wanna go back and sort of focus on the misinformation. From your perspective, this narrative misinformation has been a super key inflection on both sides of the aisle, right? Both Democrats and Republicans have been saying that there's been misinformation on both sides. I think Democratic folks would accuse the Republicans of pushing something that is not factually accurate. They would cite folks like Fauci, task force that have been put together by the federal government to go through some of the things. And I think Republicans would sort of point towards analytics around COVID, the fact that initially the idea that we couldn't even consider the COVID lab in Wuhan to be the source of the COVID outbreak being a plot point, essentially to say hiding the truth for a very long time. So I guess what I want to get at here is, how do you go about differentiating what's a source of truth and what isn't? And then, clearly you're in a voting district that's been historically. So how do you reach across the aisle and get the 67% of voters that voted for David Price in the last election to say, you know what, maybe there is some validity? Because I think, initially when first hear like misinformation and things like that, they automatically just things out.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing on the other side as well. Sorry.
For sure. I really appreciate the question, because I would say, like, I'm frustrated from both sides as well. Like, I'm a Republican, but I get frustrated at how Republicans talk sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, okay, that's a little strong. Like, everybody likes to draw these lines in the sand. Like socialized medicine is a great example of what Democrats love to just say, oh, we're just going to have universal health care. And I'm like, it just doesn't work that way. Like, you can't just get rid of our healthcare system and expect it all just to be there and government pay for it. Like, you can't just cold turkey do that kind of stuff. And so I just think people don't like to hear it. They don't like to hear a politician have like a non-answer. But at the same time, like, a lot of these things are really much more complicated than the way the media portrays them, because we have such short attention spans as Americans now that people can't get into actually like what the complication is. Like, so for election integrity, for us, it was a lack of controls. And actually, I had somebody email me just a couple days ago, because that's a big thing for a lot of Republicans and Democrats, and especially moderates. They do not like Republicans saying, Biden stole the election, or there was fraud, or all of this stuff. They don't like all those strong words because the media has created this. But Republicans have created it as well, because some people say things more strong than they can back up. And my husband's rhetoric has always been, there's a dramatic lack of controls in our election systems. And all of us, it should be a bipartisan effort to want to know that whoever is elected was truly elected by the people. And so I kind of like to just talk about exactly what Democrats say, and then say, I kind of agree with you, but don't you want to see the right person get elected that the people wanted to be elected? Don't you want your vote to count? If just because Democrats want all votes to count, it's like, well, if you voted for Joe Biden and they throw like a fake Trump ballot in there, doesn't that make you mad? Like, we don't want fake votes in there. And so I think really just talking about each individual thing rather than using a lot of these slogans and buzz terms, and really having good conversation with people, is actually, I think, what changes a lot of people's minds. They see, oh, we're not all that different. Like, the left and the right on the more moderate ends are not that different in what we want. We all want clean air, clean water. We want safe borders. We want legal immigration. We want good schools, like all of that stuff we want. But we tend to go about it differently. And so I think, as far as just pushing for truth, it's really just talking about these items, talking about things that I know and things that I can objectively point out about how COVID's been handled and how things have been, really manipulated. Like, I hear one thing and I can prove it exactly different as what's going on in the hospital at the same time. And those are usually examples that I just talk about to people. And people are like, oh, that's really interesting, because they kind of forget what happened a year and a half to 2 years ago.
I'm interested in drilling down into that point. Can you give a couple of examples of the difference? We can just start with COVID. What's
Sure.
an example of a difference that you saw is what you saw from like a boots on the ground perspective?
I'd say like my two favorite examples. One was from the beginning of COVID. There was like this whole supply and demand issue, which, you know, we have problems with that now, but specifically it was with PPE at the beginning of the pandemic. Is the hospitals were telling us from the CDC, of course, that no one needed to wear masks in the hospital unless they were going in a COVID patient's room. And if they were going in a COVID patient's room, they only needed to wear two what I would call droplet masks. It's like the type you'd buy at Costco or something. They're not N95s. And from a nursing perspective, actually, nurses are really the ones who kind of really push for isolation. The doctors are not super involved with that unless it's something kind of weird. So, from a nursing perspective, and knowing we're constantly putting patients on different kinds of isolation, if we don't really understand a respiratory bug, we should be putting them on the highest level respiratory precautions, which would be airborne precautions, which would require an N95. Allegedly, we have this virus we don't really know much about, but the CDC knows that it's safe for us to go in there if we just wear two droplet masks, which we don't use two droplet masks in any room for any reason ever. The ultimate reason was it was a supply and demand issue. They didn't have N95s to give us. So I'm a big honesty person. I would rather the hospital come out with saying, you went into nursing to take care of people. We don't have N95s. We're going to give you as much stuff as we have. Please come to work and please take care of your patients. But what they couldn't do is they couldn't require us to come to work and say, you really need an N95, but we can't provide that to you. And they were really trying to manipulate that too, because I knew I should be wearing an N95. So I would kind of go out of my way to get a hold of an N95 because I was working all over the hospital at the time when it all broke out. Because from a medical point of view, you should be wearing the N95 if we don't know for sure that you don't need an N95. And magically, once we got N95s, then we were required to wear them. And now you're still required to wear them when you go in a COVID patient's room, because that was what would have been prudent, whether they knew the science or not. If we didn't know the science, we should have been wearing N95s. But it was an economic problem of supply and demand. And if you look at basic life support, like if you were to take CPR, if you were going into lifeguarding or going into something medical, the first thing that you do is the scene safe? It's like you wouldn't send a firefighter into a fire without the right gear on. So you're not going to send a nurse into a COVID patient's room without the right gear on. So instead of saying, hey, it's really not that safe, but we don't have the supplies to give you, please come to work and please take care of your patients, they just said, oh, it's not safe. It's safe. You don't actually need it. So to me, that was just like a blatant lie. And I could tell it from the very, very beginning. And then fast forward to when the vaccine rolled out, and I was offered the vaccine probably the first round of anybody because I was in Seattle at the end of 2020. And if you wanted to decline the vaccine at that time, you had to sign something saying, I'm aware I can't get COVID from the vaccine. I'm aware I'm risking the lives of my patients, all the patients in the hospital, and all my friends and family. And with this information, I'm willing to decline. And I'm sitting there going, okay, it is under EUA at this point. It's brand new. We haven't even known about this virus in the past year. And you're going to manipulate me by telling me I don't care about my friends and family or patients or all the patients in the hospital if I don't want to take this right now. And it was really interesting to read that then and see even the rhetoric to today is people think that you don't care about them if you don't take a vaccine. And it's just rhetoric and marketing that came from Pfizer. It's not truth. We never taken vaccines to protect other people. You take them to protect yourself. So it's just these repetitive lies that I've been noticing.
Now, Courtney, I have a question for you. Don't you miss COVID though? Because like I've talked before, I got out of so many events because I could use COVID as an excuse. Will you come to my wedding? Well, what's the mask procedure? Oh, we're not going to wear masks because we're Americans. Like, no, I ain't trying to kill my grandma. And then on the flip side, like, oh, well, come to our wedding, all masks are going to be worn. Now I'm American. You can't tell me what to do. Don't you miss that aspect of COVID? That's the hard-hitting questions we've been waiting to ask you. Don't you miss how you could get out of anything and use COVID as an excuse? What do you say?
I'm pretty extroverted, but I think the work from home people, I've heard a lot of people very frustrated that now they're required to go to work and they're like, we did it for 2 years at home. Why do we need to go in? So,
I mean, John Clark didn't shower for almost 2 years because he worked from home. So he's really upset about this.
I'll tell you, I learned a lot about myself during COVID. One of the things being just how gross of a human that I am, because I would go much, much longer, numbered in days, not taking a shower before COVID when I actually had to go to work.
Hey, John Clark, you know who looked great during the 2 years of lockdown?
Tell me.
Courtney's husband.
Probably so.
He looked like a model even in the beginning of lockdown. He was just, okay, we don't have to worry about a restraining order with Courtney. We got to worry about it from her husband. Like, he's going to be like, don't come to Durham ever.
It's funny, and you're not the first person. Everyone, when I walk up to people, I would say it's happened at least 4 or 5 times, and it's always a man. It's not a woman who will go like, "Oh, he's good looking." It'll always be a man, and they always go, "He's so pretty, Courtney," and I'm like, "Yeah, I married him."
It's straight men. It's straight men like myself who want to make sure that the woman in my life stays as far away from your husband because she's going to look at me and go, "Matt, you're a slob," and I'm going to be like, "Well, yeah."
That's hilarious.
So I want to go back to the misinformation thing. So we talked a little bit about COVID and the misinformation that you felt was being passed along when COVID began and throughout the entire pandemic. I want to redirect and go back to the voter fraud piece of it. Again, that's considered a pretty controversial opinion by really anyone, to be honest with you. I say, regardless of, again, which fence you stand on, there's some controversy surrounding, whether you believe the election wasn't stolen, whether you believe that there was voter fraud, whether you don't believe there was voter fraud. And you've also been endorsed by Mike Lindell, who some would consider a controversial figure in the political realm, as lawsuit right now with the Dominion voting machines. So can you go and give us an example of maybe some irregularities that you feel you saw when it came to voter fraud and things like that, and give us sort of a rundown of I guess, where you feel like the ineffectiveness of our current voting process is?
Sure. Well, I know more about Georgia because that's really where, I live in North Carolina. It was odd. People are like, well, I don't understand Georgia. I'm like, that's just where he got plugged in. He reached out, he got connected to Georgia. So for that specific instance, like 2 examples in the data. Again, this is voter registration data. It's publicly available. Anyone could do these numbers. They could run these numbers. We've given them to Democrat friends, and they're like, this is really concerning because it's all very objective. So one example would be, it's illegal, which this is logical. It's illegal to vote with a residence at a P.O. box, right? You can't live in California and say, I'm going to buy this P.O. box in Atlanta and vote from Atlanta. So most people, there's not going to be any residents that say P.O. Box 305. It'll say 101 Peachtree Lane, apartment 305. Well, if you look up 101 Peachtree Lane, it's a UPS and a strip mall, and 305 is the box number. Or it will say box E, and it'll be the suite E is where the UPS is. And there was, say, almost 1,000. It was 954. I'm picking a random number. It was right under 1,000 people voted with a residence at a P.O. box. And so the difference in vote in Georgia was only 12,000 votes. So obviously that's not going to push you over the curve. But he had about 30 categories of different types of votes that were either blatantly illegal, like that one per Georgia law, or irregular enough. And I'll give an example of an irregularity. So let's say, I'm going to say John Love is the name of the person. John Love voted in 2020. We'll say he voted early voting, and he lives on 101 Peachtree Lane, and that's a real address and all that stuff. And it says that he registered in January of 2014. Well, you would think if you pulled the registration from 2016, that if John Love registered in 2014, that he would be found on the 2016 registration list. Well, he found about 80,000 people who indeed voted in the 2020 election that were allegedly registered prior to 2016, but were not on the 2016 registration list. So
just in Georgia.
Yeah, he was doing the analysis.
Or is this nationwide? Okay.
This is Georgia that we're just talking about, where, like I said, the difference in the presidential election was about 12,000 votes, which is really small when it comes to these numbers. So his were irregularities. So he is very clear to say fraud is intention. You have to prove intentionality. And then he was just proving doubt. So in the court case he was in, he just had to prove that that election was in doubt, so that there either needed to be a re-election, some type of forensic audit, some way that they need to look further into it without certifying the vote. It wasn't saying there is fraud. It was saying there's enough doubt here. And he found about 100,000 votes that would have been very doubtful that they should have counted. And we don't know who they voted for. I mean, they could have all voted for Trump. Who knows? But unlikely. So and then if you look at a high level analysis of all of the country down to the county level, you see where there's these wild swings toward Biden when he really didn't campaign, and he blew Obama's number out from 2008. So if you look at these statistics, they're just incomprehensible. But again, we're looking at objective registration data from Georgia. So then this movie, I really encourage anyone to watch it, 2000 Mules. You can go to 2000mules.com. Dinesh D'Souza just put it out, and it's run by True the Vote. So True the Vote is a nonprofit that has looked into a lot of these key states, and they've actually used cell phone ping data, not like tying necessarily the individual with the cell phone. They could just say like this cell phone number was at these locations, and then they kept coming back to this other location, which is the address of a nonprofit that's run by, a Democrat, leaning group. And so it's like very eye-opening, and that would be more proving fraud. And that's like the first time I've even really seen it all put together right there was on that movie. And I would argue, like, anyone who watches that, again, whether you like Trump, don't like Trump, it's very concerning, and we should just not have that going on. It would be like individuals that went to, I think it's called 2000 Mules because they've investigated 2,000 phone numbers in key states that have gone to, say, more than 200 drop boxes 5 times each, and there's video footage of them like fanning out the ballots, taking a picture of them, and then throwing them in the box, and then doing that in obviously multiple locations. So that is ballot trafficking. So in general, again, it's like, so Joe Biden is our president because we live in a constitutional republic where he was certified in Congress. So this whole idea of like overturning the election is not something, I mean, it's unpopular with Republicans to say this, but I don't think that that's the direction we need to go, because that's just creating more chaos in our country. But all of these controls and all of these laws need to be reinforced so that we can feel confident in our further election. No one wants to go in there and not think that their vote counted. It's very like being at the polls, it's really cool to see how much people care about their vote. And they'll be like, I voted for you. And I'm like, oh, good, 1 vote, It's like, thank you. But it's like just 1, And so, but people really feel empowered. And so if you feel like your vote doesn't count, it's just really concerning. And so it's really, to me, it's a lack of controls. And we see that in North Carolina. They dropped this one field that was like, I don't know if it was the ballot number. I've been following some of it, but there's a nonprofit that I think is doing a really good job here that's working on really, again, our registration data and making sure that the controls are there. And another fun fact about Georgia is they don't have a data dictionary. So anyone who's a data analytics person that works with a lot of data and knows that anytime you look at a spreadsheet, there's supposed to be a data dictionary that tells you what each field is for. The Georgia Secretary of State does not have a data dictionary. So a lot of times he would call and ask a question and they didn't even know what the field was for.
What's the answer? Like, how do we solve, the issue of when it comes to voter elections, votes being counted the right way? What would be your suggestion to go about making improvement more the end result less controversial or less?
Well, I always make it very clear that I don't think I like to decrease the power of the federal government and increase the power of the people in the state. So I always want to keep election stuff to the states, because I mean, that's the whole idea of our republic is each state sends their representatives. So if they want to send their electoral votes or they want to send their representatives or their senators, they can run their elections however they want. And if somebody doesn't like the way their state runs it, then they can move out of that state. So I would still argue to keep it in the states. But if it were in a Courtney world and I think we're running it safe, I really think paper ballots and really hand counting where it can actually be audited and there's no machines, there's no worrying about the internet, there's actual it takes a long time, but they used to do it. And I think it's France. There's a European country that's definitely not like Republican conservative leaning that has gone back to doing paper ballots because of this problem. And so, and these drop boxes where you can't really trace the ballot back to the person, having two weeks to a month of you can drop at any time, day or night, drop it off in a box where there's no video camera at some of these places. I just think that's not good controls, and we would never let our money. My husband loves to say, because he did financial audits, he's like, we never let our money have this little control over it. Why are we not going to have controls over the federal election? But I mean, ultimately, I think getting rid of machines is good. I think having, if we're going to have early voting, it needs to be a lot shorter. We have in North Carolina like 2.5 weeks of early voting. It's just a lot of time for there to be things that go wrong. And then ultimately, I think in a perfect world, and people would not like this, is just completely wipe the voter registration, have everybody go and register to vote, because there's so many people that have either moved, And it's odd to me. I moved from North Carolina to Washington, back to North Carolina, and like the Washington ballots are automatically mailed. You don't have to request your ballot. So not only do they have mail-in balloting, you also just automatically mail it out. So everyone's just getting it. So I mean, I don't know if you guys have moved apartments and you like see all of this old mail from other people. It's like you might end up with like 4 ballots in the mail from all different people. Well, who's to say you're not the one just filling all those out and who you want and sending it back in? And so it's just like a lot of lack of controls. And I do think if we're going to do mail-in balloting, you need to have to request that ballot. It's just controls.
So I know that, and Matt, I swear I'll let you talk again. I'm super interested in this. In this,
Just
in
muzzled
this
over here.
So when it comes to early voting, I know that a lot of people say, well, the reason we need some early voting period is because people have difficulties getting to the ballot when they work. I've had issues with that self. I've worked an hourly job before in the past where if I take off work to go, I lose hours off my paycheck. So what would you say to someone who comes back and says, well, the reason we need periods is to give people plenty of opportunity to get off work or go in on a Saturday or something like that, have extended hours on a Saturday so that they can and actually vote. So how would you solve that potential problem? Because I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying, but I also am thinking about the fairness of the folks working hourly, you know, who might have to work 5 days a week right during the time when the courthouse is open to go vote or these voter booths are open to go vote. How would you solve that particular problem or make it so abbreviated early voting period that everyone still has the same chance to go out to election booth and get their vote in?
I mean, I don't see a problem with having 1 week of early voting and then, you know, the day of. But like I said, we have 2.5 weeks of early voting. It just seems crazy to me. And that's with like 3 different weekends. So, I mean, if you have one, to me, and then you can still have the mail-in balloting. I mean, again, not super popular among Republicans, but if you're requesting a ballot, and again, if you look at Georgia as another one of the fields, it's like they would have received a mail-in ballot before it was ever sent out. So these timestamps are off, and it's like, okay, is this automated or is it an individual? And they would say it was, you know, manual error. I'm like, it's a lot of manual error if you look at the numbers of irregularities there. So I would just say, like, if it's really well done where, you know, somebody's scanning it and putting it in the mail, and then when it comes back, it's scanned and it's attached to that person, and we know that their ballot went out and it came back in and they requested it, you know, there's a lot of controls there and they all make sense and they should all look like they make sense. So I don't think having mail-in balloting when you have to request your ballot is anything wrong with that. I don't think having a week of early voting is any problem with that. I really think that if we have paper ballots and we're not using machines that ever could be connected to the internet, whether they are connected or not connected, I think that just gives people more confidence in knowing that their vote went in and it counted and it wasn't canceled out by somebody else, you know?
You know, in Nashville, we do early voting for 5 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of like, it's like a season here to go vote. My only problem with paper ballot counting is you're going to start getting into, you know, usually the people who are counting ballots are, they're about to meet the Lord. All right. They're about to be at the pearly gates for the day of judgment. So, and then you can get into the problem with, you got everybody then objecting to this one, objecting to, yeah, John, I said that. All right. You can laugh. All right. You know, like I'm going to object, you're going to object. And with 300 million people, it's going to turn into a third world country while we're sitting here and waiting for the results. Meanwhile, then in the 4th district, while they're counting the votes, they're going to put me in charge of the show until we can find out if you win or not. And I don't think the people want that.
Well, there's also the option. So this is the way it works in North Carolina. Again, every state's different. Is allegedly the machines are not connected to the internet. And they go through the machine counts the votes, and then they upload everything into a jump drive. So they stick a jump drive into the machine, it goes in, and they have that jump drive, and then they take it to, I think it's their county headquarters. They take the physical jump drive to the county headquarters. And then the county headquarters takes all of those jump drives and they electronically send those numbers to the state. So I would say any of this electronic changing, okay, so say we have these machines that physically count all the ballots. Well, why aren't we just driving these, you know, jump drives into one location and not electronically sending anything? I think there's just ways of doing it electronically that maybe isn't physically, you know, counting the ballots, but it is again, much better controls. And why do we need these crazy expensive machines? The argument is that, these machines are like $20,000 each or something crazy like that. And I'm like, okay, with the technology that we have in an iPhone, they can't create some copier type thing that literally scans and just scans little black dots and counts the vote. I just don't understand why we need these very extensive machines to count black dots.
I'm signing John Clark up today for May 17th to go to your district, and he's going to personally inspect every person who's voting to make sure there's no shenanigans going on. He'll be on the next plane out.
Inspect the people, not the votes themselves. So
I want you to.
That's 95.
We're patting her down, baby. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That we're going to prove you can use that walker walking in there. So, John, you got anything else?
I was going to say I do have a couple of more questions. I know that we only talked, or we scheduled for minutes. So if you have time, I've got a couple of more questions. If not, we're happy to wrap it up and give you the floor at the end.
No, I can keep going. It's okay.
Okay.
We're nice. Hey, John Clark, we're nice. So she's going to stick around. It's like a first date.
A little late to my next thing, but it's okay. It's a volunteer thing, and I can just stay there a little.
Volunteers, they're used to abuse. All right. I volunteered for a campaign before. They're used to it.
So getting back to the primary, because the primary to the general election, what makes you different than your GOP counterpart that's running against you in the 4th district?
He's a nice guy. I'm actually really thankful in North Carolina for my primary because I am watching some really heated Republican primaries that I think are really inappropriate the way they're acting. My opponent and I are very respectful of each other. He's an older white gentleman that is a business lawyer guy. And I'm a nurse. We're just very demographically very different, and our backgrounds are just super different. So I'd actually say he's probably more qualified to write law than I am. But as far as like understanding people and empathizing with both sides, like talking about being able to reach across the aisle, I think, like I said, ultimately most rational humans all want the same ending to a lot of things. We just go about it a lot differently. And I just have run into a lot of different people running as Republicans for different offices. And there's some people that are just I don't mean it in any way saying black and white, but they are black and white about a lot of different issues where there's just no understanding of the other side. And so I mean, I'm very conservative. I follow the Republican platform, but I also see where ultimately we all want world peace, that kind of thing. So it's just a matter of how do we get there. And so he and I are just very different people.
What is your opponent's name? What's that jerk's name again? Robert what?
Robert Thomas.
Robert Thomas. Yeah. That is the first person John's going to inspect at the ballot with the walker.
With the walker.
Well, he is old, all right. And I think John leans more conservative than I do. I'm more moderate. I would never vote for Trump. I think I was a Marco Rubio guy until he became a simp for Donald Trump, and then like everything he said in the primary, we forgot about. But I say all that to say, like, I think that the one problem that the Republican Party has is somebody who's a Republican who wouldn't be in the Tea Party. I mean, I endorsed Santa Claus last week over Sarah Palin because Santa Claus is better than Sarah Palin. You don't have to say anything. I'm not trying to get you in trouble. I'm just going to rant here for a second. I think the problem that what you guys are running into now is, and Trump did this. It was Trump's fault. You either got to go down the Mike Lindell road or you're going to have to go down the Liz Cheney road. But you're going to split the Republican Party. So my question to you is, how do you get John Clark's vote? Somebody who doesn't subscribe to the Mike Lindell, who's going to look at you and go, okay, she's a far right lunatic, or I can take old Grandpa Thomas, Robert Thomas, is that his name? We can take old man Winter here, or I can take the radical right person. How do you because in the primary, you got to bring the party together to go on to the general election. How do you do that? If I don't believe the election was stolen, I got the vaccine. I got both, and then I got the booster, and then 10 days later, I caught COVID. So the advertising didn't work out too well when I caught COVID 10 days after getting the booster, and I'm not getting any more because at this point, why? But I respect people. John and I both we're vaxxed and ready to go, but we don't look at people who aren't as reckless. But there's also these people who think if you did get vaxxed, if you got vaxxed, then obviously, I think they're waiting for us to have the third eye on our forehead appear. how do you bring the Republican Party together after, I believe, Trump and the Steve Bannons and the Mike Lindells and the Charlie Kirks and those guys have divided it and said, if you don't go down this road, then you're a rhino or part of the liberal lies or whatever. How do you bring us all together and get John's vote?
I mean, I personally haven't run into that in the Republican Party of having, I mean, I've run into the questions. Like, I'll have some people say, if you're not a diehard Trump fan, I'm never voting for you. And then I've had people say, if you support Trump, I'm never voting for you. And they're both Republicans. And so, I mean, generally, I mean, I don't lie to people. I'm very honest. And I would say, like, I voted for Trump, but does that mean that my morality is the same as Trump's? Absolutely not.
Thank God for that.
I mean, that's generally like what I say to most people. And then usually that's generally when I say, go, what do you think about Trump? I'll be like, well, I voted for him, but like, I'm nothing like him as far as an individual. And so that's usually where the person will go, well, I love him. And I'm like, well, I just met him and, you know, we'll go down and talk about Trump. And then, you know, I'll go down, which honestly, if I talk to Trump myself, I'm not even really sure how that would go, because I think the guy's ego is just like bigger than anybody I've ever met before. And so how do you tell a guy like, hey, if you were to endorse me, I will definitely lose this district? Like, how do you tell a guy that to his face? Like, thank you so much for for leading our country for 4 years, and I voted for you. And honestly, I'd probably vote for him again. But like at the same time, I'm like, I don't think that, you know, Courtney Giles being attached to Donald Trump is at all helpful to me. But it also is not who I am. And people ask me, I get the question almost all podcasts I go on, they go, well, who is your person you'd want to work with up there? And I always go, the new people, because the old people like all have reputations. One, I'm my own person. I think I'm kind of an odd candidate. I don't know if I seem like an odd candidate, but most people I run into, they just go like, you're a really normal person. And I'm like, yes, I'm a nurse. I'm not really a politician. And I say what I think. So I haven't really run into people who are splitting the party. Like my opponent, in reality, anytime we're in the same room, people in droves are coming up telling me they're voting for me.
Watch that walker. I'm just telling you, watch that walker from it. Okay, John, you get the next question. We're going to wrap it up here in a second.
Yeah.
But John, you asked, and I'm going to have to close out because I got to apologize yet again. Christian faith and all, I got to constantly apologize. But I do want to give you a word of advice. When you win, stay far away from Madison Cawthorn. Do not get in the car with him. Don't try to board a plane. If he wants to give you lingerie to wear, you stay away from that guy. Protect yourself.
I can laugh at that stuff too. I get it.
Protect yourself. My mom used to tell me that guy is no good, and that would be Madison Cawthorn right there. And yeah, go, John.
Again, morality is just not on the same
Yeah.
level there. I don't know if I should say level, but same.
Oh, level. Anyways.
For you, because it has to be asked. I feel like we asked Santa this when we interviewed him last week. Ask you this with all of the being overturned and pushed back to the states. I think I want to ask a more pointed question of that towards you, because I think all of us on this call would agree. I think we're all pro-life. But I think, you know, one of the things that Santa in Alaska said, and one of the things that I hear characterized a lot among Republicans, is that Republicans they're pro-life, or they're not pro-life, they're pro-birth. So all they care about is that once the baby's born, or all they care about is that the baby's born. Once the baby's born, see, you know, like we've done our job to the world. Who cares what type of life this baby has after born? And so my thought is, and I've said this quite frequently, is that I feel like if this is go down and want to enforce more pro-life policies, then we also have to provide more pro-life support to people that might not want the child in the first place, whether that be because of financial reasons, whether that be because they're 16 years old and they don't feel like they're ready to be a parent. So what would your reply be to someone that says Republicans are just pro-birth? And do you feel like that's a mischaracterization of the party and of yourself as a whole?
I think it's a mischaracterization of me, but I actually there's always a little bit of truth in these dramatic statements, like if you look back, I remember being in church as a child and women we say, pregnancy out of wedlock. They're, 19 years old. They got pregnant. They're not married. They broke up. And, they're kind of shunned in the church, which I would argue in the church, like, you should be telling them, like, hey, we love you and we're going to support your baby. Like, you shouldn't have done that. But, like, now we all know what you did. And so, like, just repent and move on and let's take care of the child. But, like, at the same time, like, I just see that, and I see that in the culture. Like, the South is just an interesting place, and seeing that little bit of truth of people who just like don't really care, or actually even are mean to women who get pregnant that aren't married, or even someone who got raped. Like, how do you know how they got pregnant? At the same time, we need to be helping these women who need help. And I would say, as far as birth control, like, people say, oh, well, you're against women. I'm like, absolutely not. I'm a woman. And so I would say, first of all, like, there's prevention, and I would advocate for free, birth control across the board. I think that would be helping women, and it would be preventing pregnancy. And so I think that's one thing that I would advocate for. I also think that helping adoption be a lot easier. Adoption is really expensive. Anyone that I know that's adopted, they're well-off families because they can pay for the adoption. And so I think that should never be something that a good, solid family that's, a working middle-class family that wants to adopt a kid, they shouldn't have to worry about paying $100,000 to own a child, And so I agree with the argument, but I also think that that's not characteristic of me, and I don't think it's characteristic of many pro-lifers. I think I've talked to a lot of these pregnancy clinics that are really trying to prevent abortions, show people their ultrasound. I really noticed a significant problem in worldview. The more I talk to people that generally are in the opposition, I would call it, to myself in general, there's a lot of consistency in right and wrong, and like, what is right and wrong, and is that fluid? And I would say, as a biblical worldview, I believe truth is truth, I believe God is truth, and I believe that God's rule is the way I look at right and wrong. And if you don't look at it like that, then the morality is fluid. And so if we look at life in general, what I've noticed, the argument is gotten very, I would call it almost evolutionary, related to life. So if you get down to it, with a lot of people who are pro-choice, I've said, okay, so what if I say, a demented elderly person that we want to, say I have a grandma that's completely disoriented, Alzheimer's, has no quality of life. I'm picking her up and moving her over here, and she has no idea where she is or who she is or if she has any pain. Should we just euthanize that person? I have had people say, well, yeah, you could make that argument. And I'll sit there and go, okay, so what about the child that's 10 days old? I mean, there are people who are super pro-choice that think that once there's that fourth term pregnancy, that people think you can kill the baby after birth because the mom doesn't want it. That's not valuing life. And so when you say, like, do you value life at all stages? I absolutely do. And I think we just have brokenness in our world, and it's very hard to fix any of it, especially apart from God.
Well, I tell, John and I, we disagree on our show. Because I'm actually anti-death penalty, because if you're pro-life, that's from womb to tomb, in my opinion. John disagrees. He wants to kill them all and let God sort it out. So we're still dealing with that. But like with both of my children are adopted. One is from Taiwan and one is from China, and they fight just like China and Taiwan do. And the process it was brutal. I mean, it was gut wrenching, and John's been with me through the journey. I mean, with my former wife. It was incredibly expensive, and it went on for 2-3 years. And so I think that the one thing the Republicans need to do, if we're going to go down the pro-life road or the pro-birth road, is we got to figure out how to get these children in loving families for cheaper and quicker process, because some of these kids are 2-3 years old by the time they get adopted, when they've been in the system for 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And even the death penalty thing, I think I was pretty hardcore death penalty, like, in high school. But the more I really think about it and wanting redemption, I think that, I mean, it sucks to be in jail your whole life. But at the same time, it's like, do we want people to be able to come to, that point of apology, or that point of repentance, that point of reconciliation with the family that they've hurt, or, that kind of thing. And so I don't really know where I stand on that one. So I kind of agree with both of you, I think, on that one.
Well, if you tick John off about the issue of the death penalty, he'll start tweeting at you and talking about how you're drunk in your front yard. So just be careful going down this road, okay?
Did y'all say that about me? I was drunk in my front yard.
I told you to put down the wine coolers and stop yelling at the kids for being in your front yard. So
I forgot already.
I high-fived myself when I sent that tweet out. I was proud of myself for coming up with that. Hey, John, do you have anything else? Because I want to do our 3 rapid bombshell questions that we've been saving for. Get nervous, Courtney. Here we go.
The only thing that I have is, before we get into these last just rapid questions, is Mayor's coming up. We're going to tomorrow, which would be Thursday or Friday, so that it can get out there before the primary. So if we've got listeners in the 4th District, where can they go? How can they support you and your campaign?
Well, I'm obviously on Twitter and, and Instagram and Getter at Courtney Geels. And then my Facebook is Courtney Geels for Congress. No, it's actually Courtney Geels now. We changed it. And then, so they're all just Courtney Geels. And my website is CourtneyGeelsForCongress.com.
All right, 3 things. Ready? Are you ready for this? Have you actually slept on a MyPillow?
No.
Okay, don't.
Well, I hope Mike Lindell doesn't see this.
Mike, bring it with your mustache. No, we have a whole show about how I took a nap on a MyPillow, and I was like, what the crap is this thing? And they're like, it's a MyPillow. It's the worst thing ever. So stay away. Take the You know what? Send the MyPillow to Old Man Winter, Robert Verman Thomas.
Robert, man, come on.
Send the pillow to Robert Thomas, because he's not going to get a good night's sleep, and then he's going to bomb his campaign in the last couple of days because he's not going to sleep. So that's okay. Second question: if you win the primary, will you come back before the general election so we can hang out with you some more?
Sure, I'm sure we're gonna have some more to talk about between now and then.
Well, if not, we'll tweet. And then finally, number 3, and this is the most important. I want to let you know this is being recorded for our audience. If you win, will you give us a tour of the Capitol?
I don't know what my my regulations are gonna be with that.
We're getting a political answer here. Santa said yes. All right, Santa said he would do it.
People ask me for these tours. I'm like, I don't even know if I get a tour.
Yeah.
Look, we will go here. Wait, I have the perfect day you can have with the rants. We'll go to the Capitol Grill. We'll pick up lunch because you're a congressman. So now we're getting into influence peddling.
Okay.
All right, so we'll buy the lunch. You give us the tour of the Capitol. I'm going to steal the podium from Nancy Pelosi again, act like the insurrection. All right. We're both going to get great press out of it. You're going to become the governor of North Carolina, and we're going to be bigger than Joe Rogan just from me stealing the podium.
I mean, it could happen. We'll see. Cannot confirm or deny, but it might happen.
Well, she didn't agree, so I went down that road.
It depends on how irritated I am at Nancy Pelosi. It depends on the day, probably. So you might just have to come up on the right day.
just you know what? Trip her when she's walking. When you get there, just trip her when she's walking down the alleyway. Just trip her on camera.
She's so old. When old people fall, they just usually.
Yeah. Well, you know how to. That was good. You know how to run against old people. All right, you're running against Old Man Winter. I want to tell you this right now. I think our demographics say we have 2 people in the 4th District who listen to us, and they're both in prison. But other than that, we did get a lot of traction from our last episode about you. This one will do the same. If I was in your district, I don't agree with you on everything, but I would vote for you in the primary and probably in the general, because I think you got leadership. You're actually I'll call it out. You're a better hang than we thought you were going to be.
Well, thank you.
And I appreciate your laughter, and we'll see you. We're gonna come to the we'll come to the results party, and we'll just interview you right after it's done. All right, like you get off stage doing your speech, and we're gonna be ready to go right there. And I want a selfie with your husband.
All right, we can do that.
All right, good luck, Courtney. Thank you.
All right, y'all have
Thanks,
a good night.
Courtney.
You may.
Bye.